Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Professor Laura King's inaugural lecture. It's really lovely to see so many people here. I'm Claire Eldridge. I'm the Director of Research in the School of History, and Laura very kindly asked me if I would introduce her and this event, which I'm very honoured to do. Laura is someone who's packed a huge amount of amazing research and public engagement projects into the relatively short time between finishing her PhD at the University of Sheffield in 2011 and being promoted to professor here at Leeds in 2024. She has a prolific publication record, having written 2 monographs, Family Men, Fatherhood and Masculinity in Britain, and Living with the Dead, both published by Oxford University Press in 2015 and 2025, respectively. These books sit alongside an edited volume and over a dozen book chapters and journal articles, the majority of them collaborative endeavours. Most of these publications have come out of the really dizzying array of public engagement projects that Laura has been involved in over the years, starting with the wonderfully titled From Hiding in the Pub to Cutting the Cord, Fatherhood and Childbirth in Britain from the 1950s to the present, which she ran as a postdoctoral fellow at the Centre for the History of Medicine at the University of Warwick, and continuing through her time at Leeds, first as an Arts Engaged Fellow in 2012, then as a University Academic Fellow from 2015, before becoming an Associate Professor in 2017. The list of museums, arts organisations, charities, local government and community groups that Laura has worked with is long, too long to enumerate here, but notable recent highlights include the Grief Series and the Leeds Dying Matters Partnership. This work has been supported by successful funding bids from everything from small grassroots organisations up to large national organisations like the Arts and Humanities Research Council. Laura is also someone who's consistently sought out positions that enable her to help others and work to make higher education a better, more inclusive space. For example, she's the long-standing Deputy Director of History and Policy, and much more recently she was our Deputy Head of School in History, where I am one of many colleagues who benefited from the support she offered in all sorts of invaluable ways. And I could go on listing Laura's many accomplishments, but the list only tells us so much. The thing that makes Laura particularly special is her inherently collaborative approach to everything she does, something that she consciously foregrounded when she chose her title, Professor of Collaborative History. And so actually what I thought would be the most fitting way to introduce Laura would be to mirror her own approach and collaboratively source what went into these opening remarks. I was not short of respondents to my request for help with this task, and many, many thanks to everyone who sent me their thoughts and their comments, and apologies that I can't quote you all in full, although Laura, I will pass all the comments on to you. So I asked people, what is it like to work collaboratively with Laura? If we were doing a word cloud, the words that would loom largest are a dream, a pleasure, exciting and rewarding, brilliant, and fun. Collaboration for Laura is the norm, writes Joanna Phillips, something that goes right back to her PhD, which for her supervisor, Adrian Bingham, felt, quote, more like a collaboration than a supervision, adding, it was no surprise to me at all that Laura has gone on to have a great career. Laura makes collaboration look easy, but in fact, as Jane Hamlet notes, it's hard to get it right. It requires a gear change from the usual academic approach, opening up and listening, and careful work to create an environment that's about equal participation, but also has an open and curious approach that everyone learns from. Cécile Bergère agrees, writing, what strikes me most about working with Laura is how genuinely non-hierarchical she is in her approach. She has an extraordinary ability to make everyone feel that their ideas matter, no matter their career stage or background. Even in situations where she could easily take the lead, she always creates space for others to shape the conversation, and she listens in a way that signals real curiosity rather than courtesy. This has also been Kate Dossett's experience. She says when you invite Laura to participate in something, she never just shows up and does her own thing. She gets stuck in and is invested in the event going well for everyone involved. Maybe it's a skill or a superpower, muses Will Jackson, before concluding, but I think it reflects Laura's politics and her personality and who she is as a historian. With Laura, it never feels about her. People she interviews and collaborates with feel able to share and give of themselves. All of which is indicative of Laura's generosity. She is, writes Joanna Beggiato, generous with her time, with her ideas, with her enthusiasm, and with her care. And indeed, the word care came up in pretty much every response I received, including Kat Rawlings, who said she listens to every point of view and responds with care and a clarity that I can only hope to aspire to. Summing up Laura's ethos, Katie Barclay describes her as having that remarkable balance of being efficient, organised and sensible, while also bringing imagination, community and care to a project. Adding, the results lead to remarkable scholarship, which is a point that I think it's really worth stressing. Laura's collaborative approach is not just nice to have, it is fundamental to the quality, the creativeness and the impactfulness, in non-ref terms, of, of the projects and the work that comes out of these collaborations. I'm sure Jane Hamlet is not alone in feeling that working with Laura has really changed my ideas about how we should research and create history. Ellie Harrison, an artist who's worked closely with Laura over many years and who we hear from later this evening, points out how rare it is to find an academic so acutely aware of the precarity and the reality that artists and freelancers live with. Adding that Laura's awareness of power imbalances and intersectionality not only means she uses her position to advocate for a more equitable world, but it also brings real richness and depth to her research and collaborative relationships. She lives the values of her research in a very powerful and beautiful way, which is why her work is so accessible to collaborators and communities. There is more, but if I keep going, there'll be no time to hear from Laura, which is why you are all here. Laura, as I said, I will pass the comments on to you because you deserve to read all the lovely things people who wrote about you as an incredibly brilliant colleague, a wonderfully accessible communicator, a great scholar, and an exemplary historian who brings the joys of history to a wider audience. I leave the last word to my colleague Katie Carpenter, who wrote, "The School of History is a better place because Laura works here," a sentiment that I am sure pretty much everyone in this room wholeheartedly agrees with. And so with that, I will now hand over to Professor Laura King for her inaugural lecture.
Oh, a little bit blown away by that. But thank you, Claire. So, yeah, here we are. And first of all, I need to say some thank yous to Claire, first of all, for all her support in research and in putting on this lecture and in those lovely introductory remarks and all the work that went into that. And thank you to everyone who added their really touching comments. I just want to thank Liv Barnes and Joe Phillips for all their help and support in putting on the event today too, and the staff here at in this hall, and to all of you guests and audience for coming. Now, I could stand here and thank everyone and go on for a while, and I will resist that. But I do want to acknowledge that so many people have contributed to this moment. They really have. In the broadest possible sense, from the many colleagues and collaborators and students I've worked with, to my family, to my parents and in-laws, who, amongst lots of other support, do childcare that make being at work possible at all. And so many of those people are here today, so thank you very much for coming. Because, and it's a link point, today I'm going to use this moment of my inaugural lecture to make some challenges to the very tradition of an inaugural as a moment about one single person, to the idea of history as a lone scholar practice as it's been seen, and to the concept of history as predominantly the preserve of academic historians. Over decades, centuries even, inaugural lectures have been a way for those who achieve professor status in any discipline to take a moment to celebrate and be celebrated for their achievements, and that's really great. In this moment in higher education, we need to seize every possible moment for celebration. We need to celebrate the amazing people who work in universities and the fantastic research that happens. And as an aside, let's find more ways to do this for all staff, academic and non-academic professional staff, not just those who can and do become professors. But when I chose the title for my new role, as Claire said, Professor of Collaborative History, I knew I wanted to seize this moment of an inaugural lecture to put a spotlight on the ways in which history is a shared practice. And history goes way beyond and in fact dwarfs the academic units who study it. I'm following in my footsteps then of my colleague, Professor Kate Dossett, who stood right here just over a year ago, pointing out in her own inaugural lecture that the history of inaugurals has been dominated in this country and many others by elite white men. I'm going to pick up a thread that she started and develop it further, that history is not about the conquering of new terrains and new knowledge, but history is a conversation. It's a practice that awaits new collaborators, as she put it. And today I'd like to add to that everyone can be a historian. Being a historian is not about professional status, but an interest in finding more about the past. So for this lecture, I'm going to reflect for 20 minutes or so on the joy and the beauty of collaboration and the possibilities it holds. And then invite some friends and colleagues to join me for a roundtable conversation about collaborative history today. And I'm going to introduce them now to give you a sense of where we're going. So firstly, we have Susan Pitter. Susan's work as a historian, producer and curator has been deeply inspiring to me and has led the way in shaping the stories of the past that get told in our city of Leeds. Her work on exhibitions such as Eulogy and Rebellion to Romance and festivals such as Out of Many, showcasing the history of Leeds' Jamaican community, shows the deep and meaningful ways in which historical thinking can celebrate individuals and communities and make challenges to the way we understand the relationship between past and present. Amongst many, many projects, Susan led a review group, of which I was proud to be part, which challenged the Leeds Civic Trust to find ways to diversify the kinds of histories it celebrates, notably through those blue plaques that we'll see around the city. With apologies, Susan, I meant to change that earlier. This is some of Susan's wonderful and really beautiful, truly beautiful exhibitions. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Ellie Harrison. Ellie and I have collaborated closely for over 10 years now. I totted that up, it's a very long time. Ellie's an award-winning artist whose body of work, the Grief series, which Claire mentioned, has provided new ways of working with bereavement and supporting those bereaved. And her company, Polite Rebellion, champions ethical and care-led practices in the arts. There's a rich seam of history in much of Ellie's work, as she finds deeply personal stories to question conventional ways of thinking about the past, such as a recent project called Loose Ends, which asked how we might remake family trees to reflect chosen rather than given families. You can see it there, the red. And finally, we have Fozia Bora, who's a professor of Islamic history, a colleague at the University of Leeds in the School of Languages, Cultures and Societies. Fozia is an expert in medieval history, specialising in the Fatimid, Ayyubid and Mamluk eras in the 6th to 9th Islamic centuries, 12th to 15th century CE. And more recently, her work has turned to a focus on the local and global histories of Muslim communities in West Yorkshire. Her most recent, very fascinating project examines the model Somali village, established in Bradford as part of the exhibition of 1904, and you can see some project work here. So as you'll see, I'll be joined shortly by 3 fantastic historians, none of whom work in academic history departments, although Fozia is only a couple of floors away in LCS. So, first of all, I'm going to nod to tradition and take a moment to reflect on the career that I've had, and I've loved it, to be honest. Universities are such wonderful places to be when they're working well. And the first role, as Claire mentioned, that I took, absolutely delighted and somewhat in disbelief to be starting a job the week after submitting my PhD, was entitled a Public Engagement Fellowship at the Centre of History for Medicine at the University of Warwick. And the brief was really broad, it was wonderfully broad, to take my own research and explore the uses and meanings of that research with partners and publics outside the university. And I did this in spades, working with a theatre company, this is the show they produced out of that work, with a poet, with a children's centre and with parents themselves. And I think it was one of the first jobs that was like this. Putting not research or teaching, but engagement, collaboration as I understood it, at the centre of the work. Researching, publishing and teaching were not expected in that year I spent at the University of Warwick. And I'd certainly never seen a job like it in 2011. And in this sense, the jobs that I've taken on and the way my practice as a collaborator has changed since that time in 2011 is reflective of wider patterns within UK higher education. And as Claire said, at Leeds, I joined a project called Arts Engaged, which was for the most part a core of 5 of us postdoctoral researchers doing our own engaged research and working with arts and humanities researchers across the faculty to think through the fairly newly minted agenda of impact. So I've been here at Leeds for over 13 years now, and in this time and across different roles, I've found my research practice changing in 2 interrelated ways. So firstly, it's changed from thinking through how to insert or disseminate my research into different sectors, debates and spaces outside of academia to a more thoroughly collaborative approach of creating shared goals with partners, to, I hope, truly recognising the expertise that any individual brings to a collaboration, whether that expertise is professional or personal. I find myself pondering different ways of conceptualising this ways of working together, different metaphors of what the process of collaboration looks like, of trying to work alongside or to get inside histories to write from within. And this is an approach that I want to develop further in the next project that I'm going to turn my attention to, a collective and collaborative history of a character known as Woodbine Lizzie. She was a woman who abandoned conventional life to live on the streets of city centre Leeds in the 20s and 30s. Her life of wearing men's clothes, of creating disturbances, as they were called, and shouting angrily at any passerby if they dared not to give her a cigarette, hence her name, Woodbine Lizzie. Her life isn't well recorded, really, in archives. There's no record of her perspective or voice on these events, as far as I've found it. But her memory, her history is well remembered. It's there in the collective memory of the city. So here, I think, is a great opportunity to explore the history of an individual and a city in the most collective sense, to surface the knowledge and perspective of the widest range of people across Leeds. So watch this space. And at the same time, a second development in my practice as a historian has been that I found myself letting my own professional and personal selves overlap more fully. And I guess this perhaps most actively started at the moment that Ellie Harrison insisted that part of us starting to work together should involve her interviewing me about my experiences of grief and bereavement before we started collaborating. It's culminated most recently in the book I wrote, Living with the Dead, that touches on the histories of 15 families who I collaborated with and includes my own family on my dad's side. And here I find inspiration in Susan Pitter's work on the history of the Jamaican diaspora in Leeds through and with the Jamaica Society, which shows us how much creative and often urgent work is happening at that community history and heritage level, where owning and being part of the history each historian tells is part of the very value of that history. As academic historians, and I am generalising, as a bunch, we're so much less comfortable with sharing ourselves and putting ourselves in the history that we do. Taking on this subjective approach of allowing ourselves into the histories we write can feel vulnerable. So I mention in this book some of the toughest experiences that I've been through, such as miscarriage, and delve into some of my family's secrets. But I think in doing so, I can reveal so much more of the ways in which histories and inherited ideas shape all of our everyday worlds in minute and profound ways. I've found using my own family history has been a way to do that, climbing inside the way that I write history, and thinking through how histories are and aren't passed on, to critically look at the way history is intimately made. From the potentially small and mundane, such as those inherited phrases that echo through generations of my family, such as from my devoutly Catholic Irish grandmother, here she is, who would say things like, "Och, aye, one day nearer the grave," to the feeling and experience of victimhood that echoes through generations of that family, as Catholics facing violence in the north of Ireland to minoritised Irish people in the English Midlands. So it's fantastic that academic history is allowing space for these more personal stories and to emerge, and for them to be written differently, for the intimate and the everyday to come out in new ways, and for academics to use different voices in the writing that we do. It feels like change is in the air. But at the same time, of course, none of these things are new. I have to be a historian here and look back. So working in collaboration with those outside a university has many antecedents in the UK and beyond. Writing from a personal stance has long roots. We can look at the example of the history workshop movement in the UK, for example, a major example of the 70s onwards, in which historians such as Raphael Samuel and Anna Davin broke down barriers between those interested in history in and outside the academy through their workshop sessions, just bringing people together for conversations. As Anna Davin put it, the boundaries between academy and community seemed unimportant. Activism and research were not in contradiction. The only problem was time, which I think we can all absolutely sympathise with. As the Haitian scholar Michel Rolf Troyot put it in 1995, history has been dominated by a view that any conscious positioning should be rejected as ideological. Thus, the historian's position is officially unmarked. It is that of a non-historical observer. But we're never objective. And to pretend to be, to take away our emotions as researchers, the markers of our identity, the experience that shape the way that we approach our research, is a way to maintain the status quo and the existing hierarchies of power, as Troyot writes. More recently, I'm much inspired by the writing of historians like Tracy Lochran, who argues the assumption of an objective stance might be unthinking, but it is nevertheless a choice to identify with those capable of an erasure of self that is believed and perpetrated, rather than those forced, always and forever, to inhabit and to be judged by their unruly bodies. It is a stand with coloniser over colonised, oppressor over the oppressed, men over women, white over black. There's a long history too of individuals fighting for different kinds of history to be included as part of academic writing and mainstream narratives of the past. In the US, for example, the historian Kendra Field has described how pioneering black scholars like W.E.B. Du Bois and Carter Woodson were unable to take on a personal position in their writing, despite the urge to write about their own family's past and the sense of importance in doing so, to historicise experiences of enslavement that their parents and grandparents had been through. Writing about their families would have rendered those scholars unable to claim this impartiality or objectivity, and therefore a professional status as an academic historian. The history of writing about yourself or your kin is, of course, a history of privilege and power. So today we've reached a moment in which there's a rich seam of collaborative work between academic historians and other historians, local historians, community, family historians, with a wealth of expertise. And so many people in this room do that, and do that in really exciting ways. And Fozia Bora's work is a prime example of collaborating widely with all sorts of partners to collectively think through the complex history of this model Somali village that was constructed in Bradford in 1904. As in projects like this one, I think and hope that there are better levels of respect for the expertise of all kinds of historians, professional or otherwise. Though when I work with family historians quite regularly, I still hear of academic snobbery and a clear sense of hierarchy. Academic historians might not admit it, but there are still many for whom a television series, never mind a TikTok video, or a community reminiscence session is never going to be real history. We're also in a moment in which engagement work, collaborative work, with communities and partners outside the academy has been highly instrumentalised for universities within our structures, within the framework of impact. Within universities, the Research Excellence Framework pushes us to see this work as valuable when it's about the academic having an impact on some kind of community or partner outside the academy. And this is, instead of the seamless melding of ideas, the collaborative approach that I think is where the value actually lies. This focus on impact has created more space and often more money and time for collaborative practice. But academics must keep remembering that the rules of the game and the funding that's tied to it push us in particular directions, and we must actively resist that push. We are, of course, also working in a moment in which history has become incredibly politicised, charged and misused in public debate. A particular reading and vision of the past is being put to use to argue against diversity, migration, and to push a vision of Britain which is ethnically white, which I'm sure we all know is a total misreading of the deep roots of multicultural society in Britain over centuries and the patterns of migration which have long changed and shaped this country. There's a moment of paradox in which history matters deeply and surrounds us, but at the same time, academic historians can feel both ill-equipped to join these debates, and equally that academic history is of more importance somehow than what happens in the media, online, or discussed in community spaces. I think we need to stop isolating ourselves. And though much of this is somewhat depressing, deeply depressing, I think there's excitement here too. Ways we can celebrate the work and work with this appetite for history that is there throughout so many communities and societies across the UK and beyond. Let's get beyond those media headlines to the intricacies of history. I want academics to work with a different level of thinking about the past, a different level of nuance. Because history as an area of interest is, of course, flourishing in the millions who log on to Ancestry to figure out their family trees, in those memory sharing sessions in libraries and care homes, in the intergenerational community projects across the country. History is not the preserve of academics, nor the possession of universities or even museums or archives, but in the figuring out of the past that happens in everyday life, across the kitchen table, say, and academics need to be okay with that. There are ways of working that might embrace that everydayness. And one of my most favourite collaborative projects, for example, was the sharing of histories of how individuals remembered their deceased loved ones through food. We took stories that I'd found through archival research and collaborative practice and turned them into a picnic. You can see it here, part of Ellie Harrison's Grief Series project and in partnership with the wonderful Leeds restaurant Swine That Dines. So think of the smell of Glasgow morning rolls that are a reminder of a grandmother, or elderflower champagne made every June to remember an aunt. And to me, this kind of way of working made visible those ways in which history is meaningful on an intimate level and is infused into our everyday worlds. And it was also just a lot of fun to work on. So I'll finish with a brief anecdote. A decade ago, I worked on a project about family archives, and I talked a lot in that project about family archivists, individuals who take time in some way to curate or collect or pass on objects and stories of their family's past. Yet professional archivists, on more than one occasion, objective, sometimes in quite strong terms, at the idea of me using the term archivist to describe someone without professional status. In their view, I didn't have the right to give anyone else this label that they had worked hard to achieve as this professional status. And maybe as a non-archivist, that wasn't my label to give. But I think that sentiment comes when we feel undervalued, at risk, precarious. And that's the moment we're in. Universities are not well supported or financed at the moment, and academics and university professionals feel at risk in so many ways. But everything is relative. We're in a better position than many. In a spirit of collaboration, I'm happy to extend the label of historian to anyone who wants it, to anyone interested in thinking about discovering more about the past. That doesn't mean that academic training isn't useful, or academic ways of thinking don't have something to add to different conversations about history. I truly believe that they do. But I think we need to get over our own vulnerabilities if we're going to make universities feel worthwhile and history matter. Because everyone has expertise, whatever kind of historian they might be, and whether they want that label or not. Thank you. So we're going to move on now to have a roundtable discussion. I'm joined, as I explained, by Ellie Harrison, by Susan Pitter and by Fozia Bora. And we've got a couple of questions to start the discussion off. And we're going to reflect a bit more on collaboration in different kinds of historians' practice. So the first question that I pose to the panel are, how do you approach collaboration in your practice, and what does it offer to the kind of histories that you work with? Do you want to start, Fozia?
First of all, it's an absolute honour and pleasure to be with you, Laura, on your inaugural lecture. You've been, as we heard before, an inspirational colleague, and you've opened up a space for discussion about how several of us work, but I think many people in this room will also be working collaboratively in different ways. And I just want to acknowledge how important it is that you've centred this mode of working, which doesn't come naturally to everybody in academia necessarily. It has to be modelled, it has to be supported, it has to be centred in the way you've done. So thank you for doing that. When I approach my own thinking about history, it has pivoted in recent years. So you mentioned that I was a medievalist, or I'm a medievalist by training, and kind of in essence, if you like, if there is such a thing as an essence, insofar as I've spent much of my life studying medieval texts and medieval communities. And my pivot into modern history through the Somali village project that you mentioned was an opportunity for me to think about where do I live, who lives around me, what are the histories of those people who seem to me not represented in such a thing as a curriculum or a textbook or a history program on TV or other forms of history making. And that troubled me. And so I had an opportunity through conversations with my colleague Nina Waddleworth and others to think about some of the people who've been colonised and or whose ancestors have been colonised but live in a city like Bradford, which I call home. And so the immediate question for me was, and is, there is a kind of an ecosystem around history making in universities and in schools and in other spaces in our society, even in the heritage sector. But there are people who never get to look in, never get to participate, and never have a voice in those forms of history making. And the project that I work on now is a story, as you said, of a community of Somalis that came to Bradford in 1904 to perform their culture for the people of Bradford and the people of the UK. It's uncomfortable for us now to think about the idea of people being put on display for the white gaze. But it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to think about why people came to this country, what brought them in terms of their motivations, and what legacies they've left behind. So I saw it really as a kind of threshold or an opening into, in a sense, working in an embodied way against the hierarchy of the university by doing my own work outside of the university and trying to push some of the resource that universities kind of sit on and, handle into a community whose story has been completely neglected. The story of the Somali village is not written in any book about Bradford. It's a story which has been remembered only by a few Somali elders. It's not even known amongst young Somalis, except little snippets that come up on social media. So it felt to me that there's an opportunity to centre the story of a community in ways that kind of break us free from the restrictions that universities put around knowledge. And I say this even though I know that the work that you do and the work that many people in this room do is collaborative. Nevertheless, what is a university It's a place where knowledge is privileged, gate-kept, and it generates income. And all of this, the economic model of the university is really about the commodification of knowledge, or turning it into something commercial, which is uncomfortable if we think about it, because we often come into teaching, whether at schools or at universities, with ideals. You know, we love learning, we want to pass that on. But there's a real structural problem here, which is that we speak about engagement and impact, but we actually put barriers to it in many intangible ways. So the Somali Village Project is an opportunity to give back to a community. Now, it's not me giving back, and I don't want to centre myself, because really it's what we began with was a conversation with Somali creatives and academics and researchers. A lot of, as you will know, a lot of really important research happens outside of universities. So really we reached out to people that we knew in the Somali community, and a snowball effect occurred. And then people came to us and said, we have a real interest in this, we have related archives, related questions, related creative practice. So we got together a group of Somalis, and we've handed the project to them. So we created an organisation called somalivillage.org.uk, and they decide what are the important questions around the community that came in 1904, what are the ethical parameters of the project, where should we go for funding, what kinds of things will we write about, what will be the artistic responses, how do we share it with the young and older Somalis. So all of that work is really directed by the Somalis, who are our collaborators and friends in the project. And so you know, I've kind of had my knuckles wrapped because I've not applied for a certain kind of ethical approval. And the reason I haven't is because it's not my project that I'm asking people to share in, but rather it's a project that the community holds, and I'm contributing to their work. And they should be, you know, in a sense, the ethical approvals are for them to decide, because they are acutely aware of the sensitivity of talking about a colonially racialized community in Bradford, something which doesn't sit comfortably with a lot of people. Having said that, the project has had great momentum. It's been shared in lots of ways. It's going to be on the TV in January and so forth. So there's been a great deal of support for the project. But for me, working collaboratively has meant a step change from what I was doing before as a medievalist. And it's been exhilarating and a great privilege. Thank you.
Just repeat the question.
I was thinking of how do you collaboration in your practice, and what does it offer to the kind of histories you work with?
Thank you. You know, like Fozia, I think we're all really happy to be here and to celebrate and to remember this day with you, that we hope will go down in history as well. So in terms of my approach to collaboration and so on, quite simply, the stories, the histories that I've shared in the projects that I've been blessed to work with and to work on and to champion don't belong only to me. I'm a part of those stories, but I'm a line in a chapter of many books and many volumes of that history. And I know that I could quite easily, particularly with Eulogy, which was about the lives and journeys of first-generation Jamaicans of Leeds, my parents' generation, who are no longer with us, as told through the guise of their funeral programs. And I could have quite easily gone and told the story of my family and their extended family, who are, by all means, storytellers, whether they know it or not. And I think, isn't history storytelling? Yeah, I could quite easily have done that, but then that would be my story, or my family's story. And it needed to be part of a bigger picture, and that bigger picture is a story of this city as well. And so, just a little bit of context. In 2017, we lost my father. A year later, we lost his very best friend. On both those occasions, we were pulling together the content, so the photos and the eulogy for both of them, and asking the questions like, what was my father like? What was Sonnyman, his friend, what was he like? What happened when they came here in the 1950s, Sonnyman, and my father in 1960 with the suitcase that we still have to this day in his hands? What happened? What are those stories? And we found out so many things. And in that process, it wasn't until the day of the funeral that I understood that Sonnyman, who I had grown up with my entire life, is not called Sonnyman, and is called Daniel Warrington Bloomfield. And for me, there was something about this photo of him, that name, which was so grand, and so on, and the photo in his funeral program, much like my father's photos, and as is typical right across many Caribbean communities, you will see a photo of when they just arrived in this country, typically taken in a studio in Leeds. It was in Chapeltown with the Gerald Don Studios. And I figured that if that one funeral program tells one life story, the photo and the eulogy, then a collection would tell and could tell the story of a generation. And that's what we did. But I couldn't do that, we couldn't do that with an I in it. It had to be collecting those funeral programs. And there was something about that, of course, it was very moving for everybody concerned. It was very touching, but there was something about it that made me realize that I was being entrusted with something that was precious. Precious because they're family histories and family stories, but also precious because they had not been seen before, they had not been told before. They had been seen as too ordinary to make history or to be history. And I think that's something that's really important in terms of telling those stories of communities, no matter what that community is, that says this is important. And when we went on to do the second generation story, my generation, of being raised in the 70s and 80s and being now the first generation of Black British citizens here, it was then again about valuing that. So I could be a part of telling that story. But when I was asking folks, bring me your photos, bring me the things that you have from the 80s, and realizing that because the 80s was such a disposable time, that we were throwing things out in a way that our parents never did, that they kept the ticket that they landed with, the landing card, that they kept their original passports, that they kept their first pay slip from 1954, that they kept all those mementos, and so on. It made me realize just how important it is that we recognize it as well. How important it is. And so when people are coming to me and saying, I've only got stories of when we used to go to Potter Newton Park on a Sunday, every Sunday, to listen to sound system, or that time when we went to Carnival and this happened. That's history. And we don't seem to have been allowed to value that. I think the other thing in terms of that, so there was a trust, there was being trusted, not just with stories that could be shared, but also with secrets. Every family has secrets. Communities have secrets as well. And I think there was a real responsibility around how do we tell those stories responsibly? How do we protect the people that gave us those stories? How do we protect the people that are in those stories as well? And so there's, that collaborative approach that means so that I think is really, really important and important that we respect and acknowledge. For me as well, there was also something generational. Obviously, it was an incredibly moving thing to be a part of. And I remember interviewing people with whom I'd grown up, who started to tell me stories about when they, for example, a lot of them were nurses, and telling stories of being asked, recruited to come here, not we're coming, we're just coming, being recruited, actively recruited in the Caribbean to come here to kind of kickstart the NHS, which was born in the same year as Windrush came, 1948, and to come here to be told by the patients that they were looking after, whose lives they were saving, who they were caring for, don't touch me. Does your black come off? Why are you touching? I don't want you around me. All of those experiences. And telling me in a matter-of-fact way, not crying, no tears, but it moved me to my core. And I think there's something about having that recognised. But also there are stories that are so much more personal as well. You know, those same women, some of them were saying, you know, we had to leave our children behind to come here. And there isn't a person alive that cannot have empathy. You may not understand what it means to be in a black skin, but you can have empathy around having a child and having to leave that child behind to go start a better life. And so when we did eulogy in a space where, by the way, we had to search and beg and so on around the city for a space, and I could have got lots of spaces, and quite often was told, you can have this corner in this community space, that's what we do for communities. And I was not having that, because I know what that meant, and I knew the thing that we said quite clearly, these are human stories for all humans. They're not just about victimhood, they're about people being in love, they're about people bringing up children in love and laughter, and people doing extraordinary things and shaping laws, and people just going to work and being ordinary as well. And I knew, and it ended up being the most visited exhibition still in Leeds Central Library's 140-year history. But, and I only say that to say, everybody that went there wasn't black. Everybody there that visited wasn't Jamaican. And the people that went there, I haven't hugged so many strangers in tears in my life. People who were saying, we know what that paraffin heater is, because we had that in our room as well. Somebody that came from Denmark who had a traumatic experience about being separated from a child because she was a young single Catholic mother. And knowing what that separation is. And so those histories that connect and the collaborations, it can't happen without collaboration. Otherwise we would all be academics writing notes which is valuable. And I think there's something to be said about where they come from and where they end up, and where those archives end up and what becomes of them. So yeah, what I do, I could not and would not do without collaboration and without respect for the stories that are being told.
I think that was the amazing thing about those exhibitions, that starting with, you know, like you described, the one person, your father, and starting with that one family and then building out so it becomes this global story, you know. Yeah, really blew me away. Ellie?
Oh, how do I follow that? That's pressure. Yeah, I suppose, because I trained as a theatre maker, and there's something about I don't make theatre now. I don't know what I make. It's weird shit that people move through rather than sit at one end of. But I think my sense of theatre is innately collaborative. And then I made a solo show, partly because I couldn't afford collaborators. I had no funding. And I made a show about my own personal experiences of grief. And even though the show is dealing with some quite difficult subject matter, it was quite sort of light and playful. And what started happening was people would come up to me after the show and buy me a glass of wine, which was great, and say, that really reminded me of when I lost my partner or my child or my parents or my best friend. And so people started donating their stories to me without me really planning for that or expecting it. And I thought, I have a responsibility to find a beautiful container or amplifier for all of these stories that people are donating to me. And so I thought, oh, maybe I could make a trilogy, because a lot of cool kids were making trilogies. And then I realized I wasn't cool and thought, well, and found a 7-stage grief model. And I thought, 7 projects that invite people to share their stories, and because I recognise that what was happening on stage in the show was a lot less interesting than the conversations that were happening after it, and but the art needed to be there as the prompt, as the way in for people, and so that's why the work stopped being performance, because first the stage disappeared and the light disappeared, and then I started making installations which were really about creating shared spaces for people to talk and share and have their voice heard. And I suppose through that, a really important, the way I approach collaboration is to boldly not know. And I'm thinking, we made a fun fair about anger called The Unfair, where you could go in and do like angry karaoke with a punch bag, or like you could write a really abusive letter to your ex and then we'd bottle it up for you so you don't have to. And this group of lads, they were maybe 14, 15, came up to me and they were like, oh, what's this? And I was like, oh, it's an unfair, it's about anger. And they were like, did you build it? And I went, yeah, I did, because I'm a really angry person. And they went, you don't look like an angry person. And I was like, oh, you have no idea. And they said, oh, we're angry too, but we think that people always judge us for being angry, or like that we're supposed to not be angry. And I was like, well, you can be angry here. Like that's the space, we're talking about that. And one of the lads came up to me afterwards and went, Ellie, I know I've used up all my tokens, but I've been thinking about it and I think I am really, really angry. And I've not been treating my mum very well. And I would really like to go back into your Take a Step Back booth and give her a ring and say, sorry, is that okay? And I was like, yes, please take the keys. To take as long as you like. And so I feel very privileged that they put down their assumptions about me to talk to me and share with me. And the grief series and my work with Laura and all of the work that I try and do is about boldly not knowing and boldly going, I would love to become an expert of not knowing, and of recognizing that people have their own expertise and their lived experience, and taking that time to become disciplinarily bilingual and to listen, really, and perhaps in slight contrast, I have often used my own autobiography as a way in, but autobiography as permission rather than as something that is there to be learned from. And I suppose it's about saying, this is where I sit, this is my experience, but I know yours is different and yours is unique to you. Will you tell me about how the world is for you? So I suppose, yeah, it's definitely built on boldly not knowing and respect that people have huge expertise in all sorts of different ways that I won't realise initially, maybe. And that has allowed me to collaborate with engineers and chefs and 5-year-olds and world leaders of palliative care and Dave from down the street who doesn't know how to talk to his friend because his friend's just been bereaved. So, yeah, that feels central.
Thank you. And my second question to the panel was, what role do you want to see universities playing in supporting creative and inclusive histories? So 2 of us work in universities, 2 of us work outside universities, sometimes engaging with universities. What is the role of the university in all this, if at all?
You go, please.
I'm thinking. So, not me, the work that we've done, when I say we've done, has received a lot of attention and also opportunities for collaboration. And naturally, universities, academic institutions, not just in Leeds, internationally actually, have shown some interest in capturing what we've produced and what we've done and what we've said. And quite often, it comes from a place of, well, we want to do some oral histories. Well, we've done these oral histories. For example, if I'm just talking about the first generation, how many times can they tell this story? And what are you going to get out of these stories that they haven't already said, or that they would say in a different way to different people? Because I know, fictional, by the way, I know that Mrs. Hendricks, who is telling me about how this is totally fiction, I don't want anybody to, how she left her husband in Jamaica and ended up with somebody else and somebody else's husband and wife and this and all of that coming to a TV screen near you very soon. I know that wouldn't be given to a university researcher. I know that. So I say all this to say that quite often I think universities think, right, we're going to come in and we're going to gather and harvest, I call it, harvest all this data, all this information, and we'll get it, and then that's it, that's the archive. Well, first of all, that's somebody's life. That's somebody's life. Second of all, you're going to get some information, but it's just going to be data. It's not going to be rich. It's not going to be the same. And also, I would also put to a lot of the universities, who do you have in your infrastructure? What does your university look like? Who is asking the questions? Who is doing this research? Because if it always looks as it looks now broadly, you will always get the same outcomes, always. And so there's something about that representation in universities, and whether that is collaboratively, whether it is with, I hate the word consultants, but collaboratively or with partners and so on, and that can be within communities, that can be with individuals. I think that's something that perhaps look a little bit more into. Another one as well, going into these projects, please don't parachute in and parachute out again. Please build a relationship. Don't come in and say, right, we want you to share your deepest secrets with us because we're strangers and we just want to have this because we're universities and we're going to use it for this. Build a relationship, because I certainly won't be telling you my deepest, darkest secrets, just cause. So build relationships with the organisations, with the individuals, with the communities that can do that, and continue that after the project is over. Do you know what I mean? The story doesn't end there. There's opportunities to build those relationships and to see how those histories evolve as well.
Yeah, and I feel like there's not enough emphasis on endings and having good endings to projects. Like, we all understand that funding runs out, but how do we do that in a way that is transparent and mutually agreed? And I always think about, like, how do we have an emotional accessibility ramp for everybody into the project, but also a real sense of what the legacy could be, and being pragmatic about the limitations and transparent about that, because I feel like endings are so often rushed and ill thought through, and for me, care is a deeply efficient thing. Rather than building something and then at the end of the project letting it disappear in a puff of smoke, keeping those relationships going, nurturing them, is hugely efficient. It is. Like if you care about the people you're working with and they care about you, you get so much more work done. And it goes in all sorts of different directions. Like, I met like a mountaineer, and he kind of said the art of adventure is traveling safely in dangerous places. And I thought, Yeah, that's something that I want to nab for my practice, because we need to think about how we travel safely in these incredibly tender areas, and part of that is about all knowing how the project or the relationship might end.
I 100% agree, and I don't know if you've found this in your practice as well in the projects that you've done in communities, but there's something about, as I said, parachuting in, and even if there are great relationships, and collecting and gathering all these stories and experiences of somebody and saying it's going to be in an archive, and that sounds really attractive. It sounds really shiny, to somebody in a community to say, oh my gosh, our story's going to be an archive. But isn't it a little bit of a travesty to say, I'm going to take your story, I'm going to put it in an archive somewhere, whatever an archive is, and never again do you see it as a community, and never again do you get access to it, and never again do you use it, and never again does the second and third and fourth and fifth generation see that and know where their journey started from. So I think there's something to be perhaps learning, shall we say, an opportunity to do better is how I like to put it for universities. Yeah. Also, sorry. Also, maybe stop telling little community organisations that universities don't have any money.
Yeah.
Just a tip.
Absolutely.
Sorry. Very much relate to what you're saying. I have a critique of the university. I might begin with that. But then I also think there's opportunities there to do things radically differently, not just slightly differently, but radically differently. The critique is that when we think about the research that's done in universities and a lot of really important thinking and writing and creative responding to history happens outside of university spaces. But one of the things that we academics are kind of, one of the structures we work under is a research structure where we're expected to be innovative, we're supposed to develop expertise, we're supposed to have impact. These kinds of buzzwords, they are, in my view, they cement the hierarchies that universities create and produce. For example, if we take a concept like expertise, it really favours the idea that you find, you get a talented person, and talent is such a ridiculous word if you think about it. If you really ponder, when you're singling somebody out for having talent, what does it actually reflect? It's not something innate. It's to do with opportunity. It's to do with an environment. It's to do with a support system and money. Universities develop these ideas and mantras, and we're supposed to sort of fall in line with them. Now, I'm not making the argument that Nigel Farage makes, or people like him make, that there's no such thing as expertise, and the kind of, let's say, kind of denigration of knowledge per se. I'm not saying that there's no such thing as expertise. I'm questioning the notion that expertise lives in institutions, whether that's a museum, or whether and that relates to your question about labelling someone an archivist. I've had the same experience with curators, but also me calling myself a historian, even calling myself a professor. These things actually, and I try not to, it's because they're expressions of ways in which we categorize people, categorize the work they do, categorize the role they play in society, in ways that I think really shore up privilege for a few. And so when we're told to have impact, and I'll stop whinging in a minute, I'll get on to something more constructive. When we're told to have impact, or to be innovative is to produce something new and fresh. That's actually impossible. No person produces something fresh. We work with the work done by other people, and continues to be done by other people. Even impact, the idea that we have impact by working with communities. We produce measurable change because of work done within university walls. I find that really, really problematic. It's a terribly a gatekeeping kind of construction of knowledge. So what I think universities could do differently, I think, is to really think about, in a reflexive way, what are the real resources universities carry? Yes, knowledge is a very important thing that is produced in universities as elsewhere. I mean, knowledge is another one of those words which we can unpack. But nevertheless, there is useful work being done in universities, particularly the kind where community and their histories and their research is centred. But there are still infrastructures that prevent that work from being more meaningfully opened up and shared. And that really is around funding. It's around things like, we have something called the Research Excellence Framework, the REF. You probably know about it.
Oh,
so
I'm fluent in it now.
Yeah. And so those things really, if we really examine closely what we're expected to do under the umbrella of research, it's actually quite restrictive. And so this leads to the kind of problem that you've talked about, Susan, which is that you go into a project, the university funds that for a bit, and then some outputs are produced. The university gets some benefits out of it, very tangible benefits, economic benefits, because of course if you have lots of research outputs, your rankings go up and you get more funding. It's a kind of, the logics are quite materialistic. And that does not, I think, really help us to produce well-being in societies, producing well-being around what new forms of knowledge or shared forms of knowledge can do for individuals, families and communities, which is to develop a relationship with the world around you in ways that cement your identity, allow you to share experiences with others about who you might not know as much, to find institutions like museums or galleries that tell your stories, that tell the story of your intimate life, your personal kind of connections with each other, and not the kind of grandiose colonial narratives that we far too often see in institutions. And I say this with a kind of mea culpa that, I've been part of that form of knowledge production for far too long and continue to be in key ways. But I think universities, if they have the ability to be honest about their role in society, I think you could go quite deep in unpacking what they're not getting right and what they should be doing differently. Yeah.
And I think we can resist some of it. I think there's option.
Absolutely.
On that note, I think we should probably move into the bar area for some refreshments and to continue the conversation. So thank you very much for everyone for coming, and thank you to the panel for joining me. Please go and have some.